Okay, well, welcome everyone to the campus as a catalyst, leveraging data, partnerships, and university innovation to shape imaginative, sustainable spaces. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I am the head of branded content at Times Higher Education. I am delighted today to be joined by my two colleagues, Faye Bowser, who is joining us from Siemens, who are our partner for this event, and Andrew Arifuzman, who is Chief Administrative Officer at the University of Toronto in Scarborough. Faye, Andrew, welcome to you both. Before we dive into the main discussion, I thought it might be helpful if I can just hand over to each of you to do a brief introduction. Faye, it would be fantastic if you could tell us a little bit about what Siemens is doing in this space to help universities. And Andrew, perhaps we can come to you to just get an overview of the sustainability transformation at UTSC. So, Faye, if you'd like to kick us off, please.
Great. Thank you, Alistair. Happy to. So, as you said, I'm Faye. I lead our higher education vertical at Siemens. So that means in practice, I spend a lot of time with universities and colleges about how to transform their campuses to achieve strategic goals, whether that's about improving operations, enhancing student experience, or making progress on sustainability. And actually, I was thinking a bit about the theme of today's webinar, and I found myself coming back to this word of campus itself. So maybe you already know, it was news to me, that the word campus, it actually originates from the Latin meaning for open land or field. And if the records are right, it was first used to describe the grounds of Princeton right back in the 18th century. And you can see how much it's over time come to sort of symbolize universities everywhere, these sort of spaces where people are coming together to exchange ideas, where knowledge grows, and where society is ultimately investing into its future. So the origins of the world of the word is sort of centuries old, but I think that core idea of a campus as a space where community and ideas come together, that still really matters today. And in fact, there's a bit of a paradox that we're facing at the moment, that we're living in a world where we can learn anywhere. It can happen online, it can happen on demand, on the move. But it's equally a time when the physical campus has never been more important. And I think that's because the campus, it's more than just a backdrop to that learning. It's the place where the knowledge, the people, and the purpose, they come together in a way that a digital platform could never replicate, in my opinion, my humble opinion. So in if the campus can be used as a way to sort of mirror the values of the institution, then the way that those values are coming to life today is ever increasingly through data, because it's data that's telling us how is the space being used, how is energy being consumed, how can we act on sustainability and well-being. And there's a big majority of leaders in higher education who would say data is critical for institutional survival, but it's the minority that would say they feel that they have the tools, the expertise, and the systems to be able to use it effectively. So, as one recent study that I read put it, universities are both data rich and data poor. They've kind of got this abundance of information, but struggling to translate that into insights and into action. And I think that matters because data shouldn't be abstract. It should be tied to a purpose. Whether it's every kilowatt of energy measured, every space that's optimized, it can be a signal for what the university stands for. And when you add up all of those signals, they can tell a much bigger story, not just about how is the campus operating, but what kind of future the institution is working to create. So the work that we do, and the sort of question that comes to my mind is, what story does your campus tell? Is it simply a place where the lectures are held and the labs are operating, or is it a place as a catalyst that's reflecting the institution's purpose and shaping the kind of future that you want for the students, for the staff, and for society to inherit? So that's why I think today's conversation is really interesting and really important. I love working in this industry because it's a always acted as such a pillar of progress. But now the campus itself, through data, through sustainability, through the way we're designing and shaping spaces, it becomes part of that progress. And with that in mind, I was also delighted to be having this conversation with Andrew as well, who I had the pleasure to meet earlier this year in Istanbul. So, with that, I think I'll hand to you, Andrew, if we can hear a bit about your sort of vision to reality and get to learn from your experience as well.
Sure, and thank you very much for that, Faye. And for context, so I wear a couple of hats here at the University of Toronto Scarborough. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer, oversees operations at the campus, but I also wear a second hat, which is the Chief Strategy Officer, which oversees the overarching strategy for the campus. And it's funny that you raise the issue of campus and its origin, because I was kind of as preparing for this, kind of riffing on campus, and it brought us back to when we did our campus master plan.
Mhm.
And we looked at universities from around the world over time and what they actually looked like. And historically, universities had walls around them to isolate what was happening in these sort of intellectual powerhouses from the sort of disruption that happens in society around it. So there was literally, walls around universities.
Mhm.
And when we did our master plan, it was about creating porosity. We wanted to create a place that the community could feel fully integrated in, as well as the university having as a place of contact. And so physically we did that with our master plan. And now more and more we're actually looking at how we create porosity between the activities and the work that's happening at the university and the communities around us as well. So data also plays a really critical role for us in that. And the interesting and funny thing about data and universities is it's our bread and butter. Our faculty spend all their time looking at data, and we have all kinds of interesting debates about which analysis you're doing, how something fits within the context, and we go up in ratings some years, and we talk about how it's excellent work. And we go down, we talk about the methodology being having shifted. But one of the things that I think is uniform now, and I've been in this sector for over 30 years now, we have more data than we've ever had. And
Mhm.
making that data create opportunities for us to improve services, to actually understand what's happening in our spaces, is becoming more and more critical. But the complexity of looking at all that data is a bit of a challenge. And so we're trying to now get to a place where we're actually actively pursuing data to help us tell stories, validate ideas, and validate some of the thinking. So, to your point, I think our ability to generate data, analyze data, and share that data is really something that I think is critically important for universities to do, both for the work that we do within ourselves, but also for broader society.
Great. Thank you both very much. That brings us into the first part of the discussion that we've got to pick your brains about today. Just a couple of notes on housekeeping before we continue. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for joining us. We've got more than 100 representatives from across the US and Canada, so it's fantastic to have so many of you with us joining us here today. Also, I think it underlines the point that Faye and Andrew have both made right now, which is that there's a kind of inflection point when we start thinking about how we look at the university campus. Things are changing, and the approach we need to take is changing with that. To try and make this as interactive as possible and to try and get a read on what your views are in the audience, there's a couple of ways that you can contact us. If you've got any questions for the panel, then please do just drop them in the box in Zoom, and we'll try and use the last 10 or 15 minutes of the discussion to answer those questions for you. We're also going to tee up some poll questions as we go, just so we can get a quick read on what people think about the topics that we're discussing today. We'll line those up. They'll arrive in three sections, and we'll let you know when those are happening. Finally, just to say that the session today is being recorded, so it will be available on demand on the THE website, and we'll send it to everybody who has registered today. But please feel free to share it with your colleagues if that's useful to you. So, um, Andrew, Faye, before we start, we wanted to ask you a little bit about a bit more about harnessing campus data. I mean, to Andrew's point, you have more data than ever before, but you need to use it in a sensible way. There's a couple of questions that we're going to put up for the audience, which is one is asking how is campus data leveraged at your university, just so we can get a quick read on on how that is working at your institution. And the second part of this round of questioning is to ask you, what are the greatest needs of your university when it comes to making the most of campus data? Andrew, I might kind of just pick up on that point that you made earlier. You're saying about how you're processing more information and more data than ever before. In line with your overall strategy for sustainable development, what have been the most useful data sets for you in order to really allow you to innovate and achieve your strategic goals?
Right. Um, well, perhaps I can start by the different applications of how we use data and how that actually plays itself out. So, as I was thinking about this area, I thought about how we internally use data. And by internal, I mean within the facilities operations group from a campus perspective. And often we're harnessing new technologies and new developments, and it's just by context. Our campus is about 60 years old now. Some of our largest buildings were built 60 years ago. And then we've built about 2 million square feet of buildings in the last decade. So we kind of have this bimodal distribution of buildings. We have some older buildings that are now becoming legacy buildings, and then newer buildings where we had the opportunity to really drive sustainability. And one way that we use the data is we use it to validate the model. So we're now with the newer buildings, we're doing, very innovative, we're taking very innovative approaches to how we actually build buildings to reduce carbon footprints and so forth. And then we need good data to validate that the theoretical model that was designed by engineers is actually working. We also do a lot of performance modeling, and we've really seen in the last decade, particularly here in the Toronto region, our climate has changed in unique ways. We've had some winters with virtually no snow and warm temperatures, and then the next year we'd have a lot of snow and cold temperatures. And we use the data to try to optimize over time and be a bit predictive with what's coming forward. Um, and then there's a level of dynamic optimization that happens sort of day to day in terms of harnessing and understanding what's happening to our data, what's happening to our buildings, and letting that data drive it and using dashboards for our facilities folks. But then at the same time, we're also looking at how we can harness data better externally. And by externally, I mean within the broader campus itself, outside of the facilities group, to do more storytelling, to allow us to develop a narrative that actually helps us think through what new buildings could look like, connect with our students, because students, for the most part here in the North American context, students want to behave as they typically behave in a building. And when I lived in Europe, when you left a building, you turned the lights off. Here, nobody turns lights off because energy is that much cheaper. So how do you tell a story to young people about what's effectively happening in a building and in their community and how they can be active and engaged? And this is an area where we want to use data, but we're not as far as I think we could be or we'd like to be. And then the other key piece is how we use data to actually share across industries. And we don't often do a great job of that. But there is a unique opportunity for us to be connecting data and sharing best practices across the system. And so, from a data use perspective, we've done that. And we've recently done some really great work, which I think we'll talk about later, um, to use data to optimize our building because we identified that buildings weren't working to optimal levels, and there was an opportunity. We did this work through Siemens or in partnership with Siemens to really look at how our systems themselves were working, how the heat exchangers were intended to be and designed, and having the data sets that really allowed us to optimize and have much more effective buildings, which reduced operating costs and reduced carbon production. So I think there's a whole variety of applications that we can be using data where I think in some areas we're really moving in the right direction. In other areas, I still think we have a ways to go.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of points I wanted to pick up on from the answer that you gave there. You said about using dashboards internally. I mean, what were the early stages of that? How did that look like? How did you select the stakeholders to be involved? What criteria did you set for them?
So currently, the data that's being used by facilities, I think, is a data set. I think we're using elements of the existing building commissioning software tools that we've been working on. with Siemens. The challenge that we're actually having is getting data available to students. And we built, and I'm sure we'll speak about this a bit later, a really high efficiency building, and we wanted to get to a place where we had monitors up on walls where in the student residence where they could be competing against each other about energy utilization and really connecting to what the data is. We haven't implemented that technology. We've been looking at different ways. Do we custom build something? Is there something available? How is it maintained? How much interest do we have? Now I think we're likely to move to a system that's more app based on someone's telephone, where they can be connecting through it. But these are the areas where it gets broader than the scope of facilities. We need to bring in academic leaders and industry leaders to help us develop those tools and connect to students, because when you talk about carbon reduction to a student, it's a very esoteric sort of concept, and trying to make that a real thing for them is part of our broader challenge.
Okay, great. Faye, the process that Andrew's describing of bringing in different stakeholders and taking a holistic approach, is that something that you've seen a lot of across the HE sector already, or is it something where there's a will to do it, but people are struggling to figure out an action plan?
I think there's a will to do it. There's also a bit of a fear to do it as well, because it comes with quite a lot of work, quite a lot of people engagement. It's not an easy thing to do, but I think it's an important thing to do. If you want to really scale and make impact, it needs to engage people. They want to get that transparency, and they want to have the transparency in a way that's accessible to them as well. I think we've had a number of cases where we put up these sort of digital totems and dashboards with all the data points, and you could say we reduced the carbon footprint by 1,000 tons of CO2, and they might be like, uh, how do you translate that? And I think that's where I've really enjoyed working with a number of different colleges and universities. So it might be about psychology. I remember someone came over to me who was leading one of the psychology departments, and they said to me, it sounds like what you're saying is really interesting, but to be honest, I don't really understand it. It's as though we're like talking in quite an exclusive way about what we want to do and how we want to do it. So that's when we've got that chance of going, well, okay, can we engage your department? Can we engage some of your students? Like, help us. Maybe we're engineers talking to engineers, and actually we need more of a movement behind this. And I think we've got um, just maybe building on some of Andrew's thoughts about different sort of uses of the data as well to kind of make available. There's a few strands which it often comes back to, that I've seen work across a number of universities. So the sort of thought that come to mind, there's the sort of the energy and the utilities, there's occupancy and utilization, asset performance, and environmental quality. And all of those data sets, they have a lot of value on in their own right, and they are interesting for people across universities. But I think that the opportunity comes when actually you bring those data streams together, as much as like bringing people together. And we're developing our vision that we see for the future towards this autonomous campus, how you create this environment where it's sort of learning, making decisions, self-optimizing in real time. So we've got that sort of real opportunity of like how you actually connect those systems. And to our earlier points, then not just bring it to people, but how you bring that to institutional goals, like how you go beyond the obvious. So if we take an example of student enhancing student experience, say it's important for a lot of different cases, then that links with how actually you're making an impact for universities' reputation and the performance in the rankings. So that kind of ambition for student experience can show up in the design of a campus, but whether it's in these collaborative kind of areas or sustainable buildings or welcoming teaching spaces. But the design we see it's not enough. Those spaces, they have to be comfortable, they have to be well maintained, they have to be adaptable. And I think that's where this operational data comes in, like the temperature, the air quality, the utilization, that if you can also connect that to a university's sort of enterprise architecture alongside finance, HR, student services, then that building performance, it's not just about facilities, it's part of how does this institution sort of drive its strategy. So that's where I've seen a sort of some best practices around the world where you think about these data streams, not just as these isolated dashboards, but how you connect it together is a framework then to deliver this kind of step change to move from facility optimization to a campus that's actually supporting the university's mission in a way that engages with people.
Okay, great. Thank you. If we can close the first round of poll questions now, we'll take a look at the results of that and have a quick look. It'd be interesting to see how they compare to the points you've made so far. Let's have it. Oh, that was quicker than I thought. Okay. So it seems like for the first question, over half of the people here today are so we leveraging data to optimize operational costs and sustainability targets and student and faculty comfort aren't that far behind. And then we look, it's a quick breakdown. For the greatest needs of university, it seems like it's breaking down silos, much as we've talked about today, and also they're delivering applicable implications too. Then they're all playing a part, all of the options that we've given people here. I mean, Faye, I thought it was interesting your conversation with the psychologist because that speaks to the fact that you have a fairly unique knowledge base at a university where if you were to go into an equivalent SME or similar, you perhaps wouldn't have people with expertise in all those different disciplines who could contribute something when we talk about multiple stakeholder buy-in.
Mm.
I think if we just move on to the second topic that we'd like to discuss today, which is Andrew hinted at this slightly, is that creating campus spaces that advance sustainability and also support your financial objectives too. Andrew, I know there's been a lot of innovation at your institution when you've actually evolved how your campus spaces look. So if we could just pop up another couple of questions in the second poll for people to consider while we're talking today. And that is going to be similar to what you've seen before. There's a couple of questions there for everyone in the audience to consider. But I'd like to start by asking maybe the examples of how you've approached this topic, Andrew. I mean, I know particularly with student accommodation and things like that, you've driven a lot of innovation in that space in order to meet your targets.
Right. And so maybe by context, one of the things that had me really excited about this journey was we as universities are places of innovation. And we have a unique capacity to take on risks, take on opportunities that others may not in the general sort of construction industry, if you think of residential development or something, for example. But then I got very frustrated with the big banks because what they have is they have sort of relentless amounts of cash that they can put into their own assets. And often they innovate and build spectacular lead platinum buildings with all the bells and whistles because they have cash and they need to park the cash in an asset for reasons. And we sometimes miss the opportunity to say, not everybody is in that position to be able to throw dollars at projects. At a university, there is a certain level of premium that we are willing to take. And it then kind of behooves us to take on projects and then share that information. And so if I think of two examples that we've done, um, one of them is, as many of you in the education industry know, we built some inherently inefficient buildings. So we built a environmental science and chemistry building. It has 140 fume hoods in it. It pumps a lot of air out on a daily basis. It has to because of the nature of the hoods. And so we started tackling that project. We thought, well, what are ways that we can actually create the most efficient system to bring air into the building and then pump air out of the building? And that led us to innovations around um, creating earth tubes, which are large, 6 foot wide concrete culverts that come underneath the building. They precondition air. Really hot days in the summer, it preconditions the air before it gets in the wind in the building, and in the winter, again, really cold days, it warms the air before it enters the building, and then we circulate that air through office spaces, move it into atriums, and then move all that air into the areas that are going to be extracted by fume hood. And there's a lot of efficiency in doing those buildings. And we built a student residence, which is passive house, which the idea on that building was that we were going to invest the dollars in the envelope of the building and actually downsize the mechanical system, still having 100% fresh air, still creating great quality spaces, but saying if the building can store its heat or cool depending on season, it saves us a lot on cooling. So we've done these two really innovative buildings. All of them had challenges, but part of what we want to be able to do is to optimize the effectiveness of this. And you'll see, I think there's a case study that we'll probably make available on one of the projects that we worked with Siemens to optimize. In it, I was a little disappointed because one of my colleagues said this is a legacy building that we're trying to optimize, and I felt like this was still a brand new building that we only opened 10 years ago. But I don't think he was quite through elementary school when we opened the building. Um, but the buildings take a constant looking after. We identified through this data collaboration that the buildings, the systems themselves weren't working where they should be. And then we were able to optimize, we were able to reduce in the environmental science and chemistry building electricity consumption, where we actually originally thought it was going to go up. We reduced carbon production through natural gas by 30% or something. Um, and that constant innovation is exciting for us, but it's also how we tell those stories, because part of what we want to do is to be able to share those stories not only within the university, but also across universities, because we all face, we're a unique industry in that we have these very unique kinds of buildings, and everybody's either building them or renovating them. And there's a great opportunity for us to share best practices in these spaces. Um, and we all have these rich data sets, so we can share sort of the background of what that actually looks like as well. And then it's also how we share some of this information more broadly to industry that I think is a unique opportunity for us, which is something that we don't do particularly well at the universities. We do a great job sharing academic knowledge, but often not operating knowledges.
It's interesting because I suppose one of the things that stands out is how do you balance the rate of change and innovation that's available to you as somebody who is building or retrofitting or modifying new buildings with with the costs that you're trying and the savings and the efficiencies that you're trying to introduce. Is it how do you keep one eye on the innovations to make sure that you're putting your money in the right place and that you're harnessing the right technologies to get the return that you want?
Yeah, I think we've been fortunate here because our projects, though there's been a lot of them, about 2 million square feet, they have been in discrete buildings, so we can optimize against the function of a building. I know we have colleagues across the sector who are building very large multifunctional buildings, and that becomes a bit more complicated, right? If you've got, there's a university in Toronto downtown that's built a new building. It has academic departments on the on the first few floors, and then residential tower above. Those There's a certain complexity that you get into when you're having these mixed use buildings. I think what we've been able to do is look to what our core objectives of a building are and how we address those objectives. And part of our target is to minimize carbon production. Not every building is suited for the same solution. And that's what's unique about universities. As you go through our campus, there are things that we've done on a residential building that would make absolutely no sense to build on an academic building. And often we look to do everything we possibly can in a building, and we've found that that's probably not the right approach. It's saying that, this building is inherently inefficient because it has fume hoods. How do we actually optimize against that? Or this is a residential building, people behave in a certain way. How do we optimize for that? And so with our student residents, it's a first year residence building. For those of you who maybe have teenagers and young adults in your family, you realize that one of our big challenges was how do we provide enough hot water for showers in the morning, because showers tend to take forever. And so there was a lot of effort that we actually put in to creating water capacity to be able to deal with 750 people showering for 20 minutes every morning at the same time. And so it's really about understanding what the purpose of the building is and then optimizing for the purpose to make sure that the people in it have the best possible experience they can.
Okay. Um, Thank you. Faye, in your experience of dealing with universities, how easy is it to get to the point where you can start to advise them based on the kind of agility of thinking that Andrew's describing, where you've really got to consider the specifics of a building that you're working on or a campus space that you're trying to create? I mean, what does that process generally look like?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and the last comment just it made me laugh because it always makes me think that um over the years I've turned into my own dad, you know. I can kind of hear his voice there telling me like turn the lights off, why is the shower so long? And now it's like actually that's kind of what I do for business as well. So it's you know, he would be glad for how much of an that's influence that had on me in the workspace. You know, there are I think that you can't underestimate with universities, you know, they know their own facilities, they know why decisions have been made, they know the history and they know the sort of strategies. So there's a lot of knowledge that's inherent within the institution. And we do have a well-trodden sort of process that we go through where we see, well, what's the value that we can bring to the table when we can collaborate on that kind of sustainability journey. Part of that comes from because we're also going through the same thing. You know, we have manufacturing sites all around the world. We have offices all around the world. We have R&D facilities all around the world. We've got a mission to get to net zero by 2030. And we have that within our sustainability framework about reducing scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. And, you know, once you're now it's scary. I remember when this was announced back in 2015 or so. And so when you're saying net zero by 2030, it's like, well, we've got lots of time. There's lots that we can do. Now it's 2025. So you get to the really hard to do stuff and you get to the stuff that is, you know, the business case can be quite challenging. So we want to use that knowledge. We want to share those best practices. We want to obviously leverage the value of data to start to simulate in the virtual world what could be possible in the real world so that people feel like they're making really well-informed decisions. It shouldn't be a kind of what if and let's try and find out. It's like let's run these simulations because there's never one perfect system or solution. There's going to be different options and just understanding what those sort of consequences or outcome will be will help go that's right in that application and what may be different, you know. And I think to Andrew's point, I find within higher education, it is very collaborative. There's a lot of willingness to talk about best practices and to come together for someone to say, I tried this and I learned this, and you know, so and we try and play our role in that as well by sharing those. So it's yeah, a bit of
Have
fun.
you seen the amount of skepticism about the cost of decarbonisation decrease over time? Is that something that is just generally helped by the fact that you can take an evidence-based approach with the data and the use cases that you have now?
I think that there is, you know, there was a time, and maybe we're still in that time, when it was almost put against, you know, what do you do? Do you optimize cost or carbon, as though these are two like different things? And I think that a lot of the experience has shown that you don't need to pick one or the other. This isn't a, you know, this or that. And quite often the art in this is trying to find where those goals align. You know, if we said, okay, we want to go on a decarbonization journey, we can see typically you could save anywhere between 20 to 40% in energy consumption when you take a kind of holistic approach about efficiency, whether you're looking at the sort of building systems or whether you talk about integrating renewables or digitalizing operations. There's a chance there of going, how do we be more efficient to reduce the cost? And as a consequence, you know, we're also reducing our carbon. We've got a good case of this in Germany, actually, in Goethe University. And what the sort of situation was, they asked for Siemens to come and help them with some of these high energy consuming, sort of outdated infrastructure buildings. And these buildings spanned across 71,000 square meters. And it was a mix of labs, offices, testing facilities, and it was research and education in natural sciences. So what was found was that the ventilation system was actually accounting for over 80% of the heat consumption and more than half of the electricity use. So they detailed out this design plan of upgrading the air handling system, the control technology, and including some occupancy sensors so that you could adjust the air exchange rates based on real-time room usage. And that had a really big impact. So it reduced the thermal energy consumption down by 2/3. It reduced the electricity by more than half. And that made a big contribution to their decarbonisation journey. But equally, it saved them about $250,000 per year just for one of the buildings that they upgraded. So in that case, you go, that's a good outcome. You've saved money, you've improved operational performance, and you've taken a tangible step on your net zero plan.
Excellent, thank you. If we close the latest round of poll questions, we can have a quick look and see how our audience have responded and how much their experiences tally with what we're talking about today. So, for the first question, what is the most important factor for your university in developments to make your campus more sustainable? Energy savings, cost savings, operational efficiency comes out way in front, but also, and then for the second part, there's a much more even split. There's not really one that takes over. Your university, what does your university use campus data to engage students, staff, or faculty? It seems like sometimes, but we have room to develop it further. That's interesting. We'll come on to, I mean, Andrew, I'm reminded of your points at the beginning where you talk about how you disseminate that information and how you make it useful. Almost a third are saying no, but we're considering implementing this. So it'll be interesting to get on to talking about, exactly, what's worked and what hasn't, what advice that you have for everyone in the audience today. So Andrew, just to pick up on the point you made at the top of the hour, and you were giving us that really nice overview of how you're working. It'd be great to hear a little bit more about how you're building those transformative partnerships across industry, academia, and community, because that includes almost every stakeholder that you can think of. We've got one final question that we're going to put up for this section so people can answer. So the poll will go up by the side. It'll be the last question we ask you to answer today. But if you've got anything specific that you'd like to put to Andrew and Faye, then please drop it in the Q&A and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can. So, Andrew, can you tell us a little bit more about the communication strategy behind what you're doing? Because you're clearly making great strides, saving money, increasing efficiency, considering the student experience, which is vital to all of this, taking on quite specific challenges when it comes to research spaces. Where are the stumbling blocks that still exist when you look at how you build those partnerships that are really going to help you achieve your sustainability goals and your campus goals?
Yeah, and so I think one of the things that we're doing, as I imagine everybody else is doing, is looking at ways to attract partners into the university that make sense. And one area that we identified was student residence, right? So the residence experience really important. We have a lot of international students that live here. And when we decided to build a new student residence, which we opened 3 years ago, 2 years ago, we made a concerted effort to say that there's an opportunity here to introduce a new kind of approach to buildings. In particular, it was passive house, which is a pretty common approach in Europe, less so in North America. Again, because energy prices, I think, are so much less here than they are abroad. But it's just a high efficiency building. And part of the reason is when you look at Toronto, it has more operating cranes building residential than New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles combined. And when you look at these buildings, they are entirely inefficient buildings that are being built. 60, 70-story towers that have curtain wall systems, it's all glazing, incredibly inefficient. And we thought when we built this new student residence, there was an opportunity for us to bring a new technology into the marketplace and to de-risk it for the developers. No developer is going to say we're going to come first to market to build a unproven technology, but it was something that we felt that we could do. And the other thing that was unique is we were looking for an equity investor on this partnership. So we were looking for a partner who understood why we wanted to do this and was willing to put their money behind it. And what we identified early on is the kind of investors that we ended up coming to were pension funds. And what do pension funds want? They want long, steady, consistent returns. So they're very attracted by something like a student residence, which is generally occupied and there's very little risk. But they're also interested in the annual operating of that facility. And when we went to Passive House, there was a premium that we paid for Passive House, but the business case was 8 years. So within 8 years, they would have fully paid back the reduction through the reduced energy usage of the building and would generate greater operating dollars for them in the long term. And there was a lot of challenges as we sort of unfolded the development process for this project, but they stayed on board. And now they've really seen that this building is actually achieving the energy objectives that we wanted it to. When we did this project, we de-risked the marketplace. We had a design build competition. So we had three of Canada's largest builders involved in the competition. We had some of our top architects involved, all of whom became experts in passive house and understand how to build passive house. So that whole passive house technology is now available with people in this marketplace where it wasn't until we've taken on this project. And we now have data that demonstrates that this 8 year business case for these additional investments are going to pay themselves off. And so now this particular developer is looking at introducing passive house as a base technology for the new rental units that they're building around the GTA. And so that's a role that's I think unique to us in the university space to be able to take on things like that. It has meant that we've spent a lot of time optimizing the building. We've had some challenges. We're working through all those challenges and we're invested in it. But it certainly de-risks these kinds of projects for others in the marketplace. The other thing that emerged that was important from this is that we were importing materials from all over the world because they weren't made locally. So now we have local glass manufacturers that are making high efficiency triple glazed windows, and we don't have to bring them in from Germany. And so it's actually driving down the overall capital cost for those people that are coming in behind us. And I think it's part of what we talked about around the porosity of a university. We want to break down those barriers. We want people to see us as a place where not only do we do great teaching and world renowned scholarship, but we also are important community members that can actually help address some of the sort of societal concerns that we're currently facing in and around sustainability.
That's great, and congratulations on taking such a bold step and being fully vindicated, which must be nice. There's a couple of questions I have about that. One is you touched on this slightly. What does this do to your institution standing in the local community, and how does it change the conversations that you're having with partners about future opportunities and future projects and ambitions that you've got?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So locally, I think the community is really looking at us as uh, a bit of a beacon of hope. Not in addition to all the sustainability activities, there's a lot of other community engagement pieces that are unfolding, and we've been able to share some of our work in terms of influencing the new building code that's being put in place for the country. And so there's certain activities on that front. I think what's been most exciting, um, which is going to sound bizarre, is that the students who are in this building don't realize that they're in the most sustainable student residence in the country at the moment. It feels like a normal building to them, but when then you tell them that this is part of what they're a part of, they're excited to be there. And what my hope is that 10 years from now we would have put 7,500 students through this building, and they're putting pressure on developers to say, I want to live in a more high efficiency building. Like I know what that experience is like, and they can actually influence the marketplace because right now it's about cheap, fast, and somebody else is going to deal with the sustainability issues. So it's created a unique opportunity, and I think people are excited to be part of this journey.
Okay, yeah. Need them to take to TikTok or Instagram or wherever they're going to spread the word, I guess. Um, but when you hear about these kind of innovations, I mean, it's kind of it's top to bottom, isn't it? Like firstly from the investment that was sourced and going in with a different approach and also a very bold strategy to change how people think about these projects, which changes the investment, the payoff time, the
Mhm.
profitability of it, and then finally the stakeholder engagement from the users. Is this something that you think can be, or have you had experience of changing this for things like, pedagogical spaces on campus or research spaces on campus? Does it apply, can it apply in those cases as well?
Was that to me? Sorry,
Yes,
or was that
please.
you?
Yeah, yeah.
Me. Okay, yeah. So yeah, I think that the you know in those kind of spaces, the first thing that comes to mind is something that we've worked on in with some really interesting collaborations. Is this push towards a sort of living laboratory and seeing the campus as not just a place that you learn and create new knowledge. It's like actually how do you learn from the infrastructure, from the developments itself? And we maybe as one recent example, earlier this year, we ran a Tech for Sustainability campaign. So it meant that anyone in a university could put forward an idea and we ran it through a process of shortlisting. And actually, it was a really interesting process to hear the pitches and to hear not just the technical innovation, but the commercial innovation as well. Like, what is the practical realities? Is, you know, relatively easy to have an idea, but actually a plan of getting that idea to reality is another thing. And so we went through this process. We heard lots of different innovations. And in the end, we shortlisted one where it was sort of developed by students for students, and they wanted to talk about change behavior programs. So, one of the things that came out of it is developing this LLM where students can ask questions. So it could be a student in a building, in any type of building, saying, if I wanted to change the temperature in this room by 2 degrees, what would that mean? And it takes all of the building operations data and says, what that would mean is your energy consumption would change by X and your carbon footprint would change by X. So it gives the occupant in the building that informed knowledge, which the intention is that it creates a change behavior to maybe put on a jumper or to not change, to not put up the heating or to kind of go, if you're passionate about sustainability, then be aware of the kind of decisions and do it in quite an interactive way for the students and use sort of technology that's out there. So we've done that in spaces where it's under that remit of the living lab between Siemens and a university. We've also then got it onto the next level of how you go beyond the borders into these kind of research and innovation ecosystems. So we have sort of 16 ecosystems around the world, bringing universities together, getting new ideas. But the other thing that we've really put a lot of time and effort into and benefited from is becoming more collaborative, even pulling more industry players to the table. So we have this sort of open digital business platform, which we talked a lot about for Accelerator. Some might be familiar with the names. And that facilitated this whole ecosystem movement. We right from the big players to your Accenture, Nvidia, Microsoft, we've got a collaboration. But equally, how do we show that openness to SMEs, to startups that emerge from the university? Like, how do we kind of bring them to the table and have them integrated into what's possible? So there's usually in my mind, when we're thinking about collaboration models, they're the sort of different framed of reference that I have. It's like, one, what about how we're collaborating between Siemens and the university? The next, what's our role of bringing universities together from our relationships? Because we work with 2,000 universities around the world. And then beyond that, how do we think, Siemens, we need to be a bit humble. We can do a lot, but we can't do everything. So how do we get more people to the table to really, when that adds up, that makes a real impact.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's really useful overview. If we close the final round of polling, we can just have a look and see what the levels of engagement are that people see at their own institution. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So we've asked you, how engaged are your students and faculty in the partnerships you have with campus technology providers currently. There's a decent amount who are somewhat engaged, but predominantly the most popular answer is not highly engaged. Our staff usually work directly with campus technology and service providers. So there's clearly a gap there. I mean, Andrew, I know that you spoke earlier about, finding the right medium to contact students. If they are taking a mobile first approach to how they gather data, how they process data, then that's an extra step that you've got in order to engage with that audience. So we've got a bit of time for questions from the audience. The first one that's come through is quite a long one. We've addressed it kind of partly, but I'm going to ask it again just so we can dive into a bit more detail. And the audience member asks, what are the key strategic challenges your university faces in leveraging data analytics for institutional decision making? And how do these challenges balance against competing priorities like student success, research excellence, and operational efficiency? Andrew, that's a big one to dive into. I suppose if we pick it apart a little bit, I mean, to that point of competing priorities like student success, research excellence, and operational efficiency, is the first step stopping those being competing priorities, if that makes sense? Is there a way to draw all of those things together?
Yeah, and Faye touched on this earlier on in the conversation that I think we need to take a more holistic approach to what a student experiences on campus. And often we are competing. We have our annual budget cycles, and there's requests for new faculty positions, there's requests for new heat exchangers, there's requests for new resources to support students with mental health issues, all of which are critically important to what it is that we do. So I think the approach and what we try to do here is to take a well-rounded approach at all of that. Like student spaces and experiences really matter. Faculty infrastructure really matters. And so we've been in situations where we can hire faculty members, but they would need space and there's no appropriate space. So what's the right thing to do? And these are the kinds of challenges that we face over time. And I think this is the key. We have to take a longer perspective on what those accomplishments are. And I think what we've tried to do is set a strategy forward to say, okay, here's where we'd like to go in the next 5 years. And we begin to implement, knowing that from time to time we may need to hold off on something for a year or prioritize something else in the upcoming year. But we have a plan, and that plan everybody's agreed to. So we are now looking at implementing a scorecard, a balanced scorecard approach to the campus, where we're trying to balance um, research, teaching, faculty and staff life on campus, student life on campus, quality of buildings on campus, and really take measures that really demonstrate that we're moving the bar on all of those things. Because inevitably, and we've all been in situations, I'm sure, where we bring in faculty because there's a great opportunity and we have a lab that we're going to build, but it's going to take some time, and then there's delays. And now we've affected somebody's career because they're 3.5 or 4 years into tenure. Their lab is finally open. They couldn't do what they planned on doing. And that's not really fair. So I think we're trying to take an approach that's a bit more balanced than historically has been. Um, Now I think our biggest issue here in Canada for sure is given the changing global context, international student numbers are down. And now if it comes to reducing budgets, what that actually looks like and what that actually means. And we're just on the brink of this now, but I think I think we have to try to stay true to our values and stay true to the direction, right? Things may slow down, but we can't stop and say, okay, well now we can't invest anymore in buildings. We have to do that because that sort of path is already unfolded for us.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Um, Faye, is there a particular type of data analytics that you get asked to provide or to help with more than any other? Are universities coming to you in the first instance and saying, we need to solve a problem like X, what's the data we can use? Or are they still in that decision-making process where they're, as Andrew said, you've got a lot of competing priorities and they're looking for a way to pull it all together?
Yeah, I mean it varies really across the sector. You've got some people, some universities who are still quite at the beginning, working in quite a sort of traditional way, right through to really advanced progress around a sort of smart, sustainable campus, and then you see everything in between. So we have quite a flexible model to see like, are we at the beginning, and actually it's just about getting the knowledge about. So I spoke to a COO recently who just started, and they were saying, you know, I don't even have access to understand where are my big energy consumers, like what is my sustainability reporting. I don't have a very good metering and sub-metering system. So it's like, okay, well, before we can start to talk about what to do, we need to make sure that there's the right understanding there. So it's knowing where are you on that journey. And then when it comes to, I think, and Andrew's point as well about looking at the future for number of students and international students, that can bring a lot of conversations into how do I grapple with this challenge of right sizing my estate? Like, and can I have that kind of estate strategy backed by data? So then, like, what are those solid data points that I need to build a robust business case? Because if I'm going back against those competing efforts, then it has to be proven. And one of the traditional ways of working, and I heard this at a UK university recently, was that when the way that they would develop their estate's master plan is that they would have a consultant come in and they would audit a fifth of their estate and then sort of extrapolate those findings and say, right, this is creating a bit of a sort of master plan. And then the next year they look at a different fifth of the estate. So they go, I know any year a point in time, a fifth of my estate hasn't been looked at for 5 years. And I built my master plan on that. And so it's very difficult to back that business case when it's lacking those findings. So it's how can you get this real-time data to show which assets should take priority and actually see it might not be about replacement. What about lifetime extension? What about like operational improvements? So I think when you can demonstrate that you've done that through the data and have it in real time, it makes it easier to look at what's the size of the estate and what's the priority in the estate. So when you're competing, you can win.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you very much. That pretty much takes us to time. So I just wanted to thank both Faye and Andrew for their participation today. It's been really great hearing about all the work that Andrew's doing in Toronto. Wish you with success with your future projects. Faye, it's been fantastic to just hear about the different ways that universities can take a partner from industry and really start to look at problem solving in a meaningful way and balance the financial pressures that they're under, but also with the sustainability goals, which are always going to be so important for institutions. So just to wrap up, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. It's been really great. Thank you for your feedback in the polls. We've got some surprising results, which are really interesting, something for us to chew over when this is done. And also just to reiterate that we will do an on-demand version of this. Thank you again to our colleagues from Siemens for dropping in some useful links in the chat. We will embed all of those links in the final post-event content that we put on the Times Higher Education website. So don't feel like you have to read it all right now. You'll be able to revisit the content, and we will send that content to everyone who's registered today when it is up on the THE website. So thank you all very much for joining us, and until next time, we will see you soon, hopefully. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Take
Thank you.
care.